All right, let's talk about a piece of tech that completely changed how developers build things today. MongoDB. It's a fantastic story of frustration, a really smart pivot, and a revolution that kicked off from one single powerful idea that, honestly, would change the web forever.
And it all really starts with this simple question. You see, for decades, databases were basically like spreadsheets. They forced developers to cram all this complex, messy, real-world information into these super rigid tables. But as the modern web blew up, data got complicated. Think about user profiles, social media feeds, all that sensor data from our devices. It just didn't fit in the box anymore. And that exact problem is what lit the fuse for MongoDB.
You know, what's interesting is that the story doesn't begin with some grand plan to build a new database. Nope. It starts back in 2007 with a startup in New York called TenGen, run by Dwight Merriman and Elliot Horowitz. They were trying to build something totally different, but they kept running into the same wall over and over again.
So the founders of TenGen were building what you'd call a platform as a service, basically a cloud toolkit to help other developers build their apps. But the traditional databases they were using, the ones with the strict rows and columns, were a constant headache. They were just too inflexible, and trying to scale them for a huge modern service, it was an absolute nightmare. The tools they had simply weren't built for the new age of the internet.
And this is where they made a seriously bold move. They had this realization that the core piece they needed, a flexible database that could actually scale, it just didn't exist. So they stopped working on their original product and pivoted. They decided to build the tool they wish they had all along and solve that root problem not just for themselves, but for every developer out there.
And this pivot wasn't just a change in business plan. It led to a fundamental innovation in how we think about storing data. Instead of trying to force data into tables, they just embraced a totally new model, one that felt way more natural to developers. Okay, so look on the left. That's the old way. Think of that rigid spreadsheet. If you want to add a new piece of information, like a favorite color for a user, you have to change the entire structure for everybody. But on the right, you have MongoDB's approach, which is more like a digital filing cabinet. Each person's file can be totally unique, holding exactly the data it needs to without breaking anything for anyone else. It's so much more intuitive.
Now, the magic behind all this flexibility is something called BSON. That stands for binary JSON. And if you know anything about web development, you know JSON is basically the language of modern apps. BSON is like its super-powered, highly efficient cousin. It lets you structure data exactly how you use it in your code, with nested info, lists, you name it. For developers, this was a revelation. It meant way less time spent translating data back and forth, which made building things so much faster.
And yeah, this quote just nails the appeal. All of a sudden, developers didn't have to design some rigid blueprint, a schema, before they could write a single line of code. And they didn't have to do these painful, complex joins, which is just this awful process of stitching data together from a dozen different tables. Everything you needed was right there in one place. It just worked. And this developer-first attitude is exactly what made MongoDB the poster child for the whole NoSQL movement.
So they had this revolutionary product that developers were absolutely falling in love with. The next step? Shifting focus from just building the tech to building a global business. And this is where their growth just explodes.
The growth was just wild. In 2009, they put MongoDB out there as an open-source project, and this massive community just sprouted up around it. Then, by 2013, they made it official. They rebranded the company from TenGen to MongoDB Inc., putting the database front and center. And of course, the ultimate validation came in 2017 when they went public on the NASDAQ. Now, you don't get that kind of growth without some serious cash. In 2013, the company raised a massive $150 million funding round. For a database company at that time, that was an absolutely huge number. And that infusion of capital is what let them build out all the serious enterprise-grade features they needed to go head-to-head with the old guard. But the next big leap wasn't just about adding more features, it was about access. How do you take this incredibly powerful database and make it dead simple for anyone, anywhere to use? Well, the answer was pretty clear: the cloud. So in 2016, they launched MongoDB Atlas, and this was a total game changer. Atlas is what you call a fully managed service, which is just a fancy way of saying developers could stop worrying about all the boring stuff, setting up servers, patching security holes, dealing with backups. You just click a button and boom, you have a powerful MongoDB database running on any of the big cloud providers, AWS, Azure, or Google Cloud.
So why did Atlas take off like a rocket? Because it eliminated all the operational pain. Suddenly, anyone could deploy their database all over the world, scale it up or down without any downtime, and trust that it had top-notch security built right in. It made MongoDB accessible to literally everyone, for the solo developer hacking on a side project all the way up to a massive global corporation.
All right, so with its dominance in the cloud firmly established, MongoDB enters this final phase of its evolution. It's about going from being the cool, disruptive rebel to being a mature, trusted platform that could handle the most mission-critical jobs in the world.
For years, this was the big question mark hanging over MongoDB, and really the whole NoSQL space. The critics would always say, sure, it's flexible, it's fast, but is it reliable? Can you really trust it with your most important financial data, your core transactional systems? It was a fair question.
And the answer finally came in 2018, when they added support for multi-document ACID transactions. Now, ACID is basically a promise. It guarantees that a complex operation, like a bank transfer, either happens completely and perfectly, or it doesn't happen at all. No half-done transactions, no lost data. Adding this was a monumental step. It was the feature that finally silenced the critics and allowed MongoDB to compete for those absolutely critical enterprise workloads.
And that brings us to today, where MongoDB is so much more than just a database. It's really a full-blown developer data platform. They have built-in tools for powerful search, for data analytics, for syncing data seamlessly to mobile apps. It's the whole package. It has truly evolved from a single tool into a complete ecosystem for building modern applications.
When you step back and look at it, the story of MongoDB is just this powerful reminder that even the most deeply entrenched technologies can be totally upended by a simpler, more intuitive idea. They started by questioning the very structure of data itself, which I think leads us to a pretty interesting final thought. What foundational assumption in tech today is just waiting for its own rebellion?